The minstrel boy to the war is gone.
Welcome back to Giant Freakin' Robot.
In the ranks of death you will find him.
Science fiction is often at its best when unusual sci-fi circumstances are used to highlight real-world issues. One of the best examples of this is the way science fiction handles PTSD and the horrific realities of the practice of torture. Star Trek, in particular, has never shied away from dealing with torture. One of the Next Generation's very best episodes, Chain of Command, revolves around it and has spawned numerous discussions about the counting of lights.
How many lights do you see there?
But as much as characters like Picard or Kirk have suffered, no one in the franchise, and maybe not in the history of the entire human race, has suffered more than one pivotal character. He wasn't an officer.
Fix the replicators, Chief.
He wasn't a scientist.
My console's offline, Chief.
He's an enlisted man without any rank.
Should have transferred to a cargo drone.
He's a man who rolls up his sleeves and gets to work in the dirt.
No people, no complaints.
His name is Miles O'Brien, and he's a Union man.
A union, huh? Good for you.
O'Brien was introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation's very first episode and returned as a recurring, supporting cast member.
Chief O'Brien, lock on to that transponder signal.
Yes, Captain.
He was regularly featured throughout The Next Generation's run as the Enterprise's transporter chief. His workmanlike position endeared him to both fans and the creators of the show. So, when the time came for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, O'Brien was chosen as the character that would act as that show's chief of operations. I suspect he never would have accepted the transfer had he known the hell that was about to follow. After his arrival in the first episode, Star Trek Deep Space Nine quickly embarked on a week-after-week mission to break Miles O'Brien's body, his spirit, and his mind. There were even times when the show succeeded, though he usually bounced back. Mostly.
Victory strike limits frosted wake.
At first, his torments were more minor annoyances, like the station always breaking, being constantly nagged by his wife,
I don't need favors from you.
or being forced to go hunting through crawl spaces for voles. But the torture of Miles O'Brien soon took on a much darker tone.
Mr. O'Brien, were you abused as a child?
What?
And now there's no question that Miles O'Brien is the most tormented person in the history of the Federation, and maybe in all of fiction. What follows is an account of the most horrific ways in which this lovable working stiff was viciously persecuted. And no, we're not talking about being married to Keiko.
Miles, what I really want to do is sleep.
Then maybe you should.
Miles, I didn't say I was going to. I just meant I could use some.
In the Season 3 episode Visionary, Miles ends up running into a future version of himself before actually dying. Again. Actually dying. This wasn't one of those fake sci-fi show, he'll be okay in the end deaths. Deep Space Nine fully kills Miles off. And then to add insult to injury, he's replaced by his future self. And from then on, everyone pretends the real Miles, the Miles who was killed, never existed. The Miles that replaced him likely endures constant, existential dread.
This isn't really my life. Maybe this life belongs to that other Miles O'Brien.
He's doomed to spend the rest of his life wondering whether he's really the person everyone thinks he is, or if he's just a freaky future clone of himself. In the Deep Space Nine episode Tribunal, it starts out seeming like Miles has finally caught a break. He's off on a nice vacation with his wife. At least until he's tortured and falsely imprisoned by the Cardassians. The Cardassians are especially good at torture, and they do all they can to make Chief O'Brien suffer. It culminates in the hapless Starfleet officer having one of his teeth ripped out with pliers, before being told he's already been declared guilty and will soon be executed.
Everyone will find it most uplifting.
Eventually, his friends prove that he's been framed and free him. But the fact that he spends an entire week being physically abused in Cardassia's brutal prison system, while expecting to die, all because he wanted to go on a vacation, had to leave some sort of lasting, psychic damage. In the Deep Space Nine Season 2 episode Whispers, Chief Miles O'Brien returns to the space station after completing an engineering job on another planet, only to discover that his crewmates and family are behaving strangely towards him. Everyone is oddly distant and suspicious.
I'll drop Molly at daycare on the way to Ops.
That's okay. I'm taking her with me.
O'Brien's no fool, and he quickly notices subtle changes in the station's operations. As he tries to uncover the reason for this sudden shift, his paranoia grows, driving him to investigate further. The tension escalates when O'Brien decides to flee the station in a runabout, convinced that everyone is part of a plot to replace or harm him. Pursued by his own friends, he heads to a meeting of Federation ambassadors, believing he must warn them of a potential infiltration on DS9. However, in a dramatic twist, it is revealed that O'Brien is actually a replicant, created by an unknown entity, and the real O'Brien is safely undergoing surgery back on the station. The episode ends tragically for the replicant O'Brien, who is fatally shot just as he begins to understand his own identity. That episode might sound like a rare win for the real O'Brien, but it's not. O'Brien is left deeply unsettled by the whole ordeal. He's particularly affected by the replicant's desperate attempts to connect with his family and the crew, highlighting a struggle for identity and belonging.
Tell her I love.
The real Miles tries to reconcile the fact that his duplicate, although not truly him, shared many of his memories and emotions while interacting with the people he cares about. What Miles O'Brien endures in the Season 4 Deep Space Nine episode Hard Time may be the worst torture anyone has ever experienced. It kicks off when Miles O'Brien shows interest in some alien technology and ends up wrongly accused of espionage. He's sentenced to 20 years and thrown in prison. In case you haven't noticed, Miles spends a lot of time in prison.
I didn't do anything wrong!
But this time he doesn't get out. Over the course of that episode, we watch the decades go by as he lives out the rest of his life in a horrific jail cell. He's often on the verge of starvation. He's not allowed visitors or contact with the outside world. His only socialization is with another prisoner, who eventually becomes his best friend. Conditions become so bad, both O'Brien and his friends start to lose their minds. The guards abandon them and stop feeding them. On the edge of total starvation, with their wits already half gone, Miles and his friends start fighting over the few scraps of food they have left. And Miles kills his best friend. That sounds bad enough, but this isn't a normal prison. It's a prison simulation that only happens in his mind. What seemed like decades to Miles was in fact only a few seconds in reality.
I know this is going to be hard for you to accept. But you haven't been in prison. What you experienced was an artificial reality.
To Chief Miles O'Brien, it's utterly real and always will be. But the 20 years he spent there weren't real, and when it's over, he's thrust right back into his normal life like it never happened.
You're pregnant.
That's right.
It's been so long, I'd forgotten.
Only. To him, it did happen. The things he believes he did and endured feed intense PTSD, causing him to attempt suicide rather than continue on.
You don't understand at all. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it to protect Keiko and Molly. And everyone else in the station.
Dr. Bashir talks him down and gets him in therapy, but Miles O'Brien is never quite right again.
The worst part of it was, the next day the guards began feeding me again. I killed them for nothing.
We could go on for hours. There was that time Starfleet intelligence forced Miles into going undercover and pressured him into intentionally getting his friend killed.
I'm sorry, Bilby. You'll never know how little comfort that is.
And there's his distant past, which is already haunting and tormenting him before we even meet him.
Cardassians were advancing on us. Moving through the streets, destroying, killing.
Before we knew Miles on TNG, he was a soldier fighting in brutal conflicts against the Cardassians, barely surviving to tell the tale.
It's not you I hate, Cardassian. I hate what I became.
So, of course, he ends up being forced to serve on an old Cardassian space station and make friends with the enemies who killed off his comrades. There's more. Like the time he almost died from an ancient biogenic weapon.
My legs. I can't feel them.
Or that bizarre incident when an alien takes control of his wife's body and threatens to kill her unless he sabotages the station.
Do everything I tell you to, accurately and without question.
Everything?
If you don't do precisely what I ask, I'll kill your wife.
Miles is left protecting his daughter from her own mother, a horrifying prospect for any father to endure.
She missed her mommy. Isn't that sweet?
When are you gonna come? Ow, Mommy, that hurt.
Oh.
If there's any solace to be had here, it's that it seems Miles was eventually recognized for his bravery and perseverance. In the far-off future beyond Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Miles O'Brien is recognized as one of the most important people in Starfleet history. He's immortalized in the third Star Trek Lower Decks episode, Temporal Edict, during a scene in the far future where a classroom learns about noteworthy people in Federation history.
Perhaps the most important person in Starfleet history, Chief Miles O'Brien.
Why was O'Brien chosen for this honor? It's never stated, but it may very well be, that surviving all these many torments ends up making him into the perfect Starfleet officer. Or it could just be that he's the best, because Miles O'Brien, like his ancestor Sean
Aloysius O'Brien,
is more than a hero. He's a Union man. Help Chief O'Brien out by giving this video a like. And if you'd like to see him divorce Keiko, now's the right time to hit subscribe. We'll see what we can do to make that happen. Until next time, this has been Giant Freakin' Robot.
O'Brien!
The minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you will find him. His father's sword he hath girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him.
Land of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betrays thee, one sword at least thy rights shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee.